Good morning. Please turn with me to the first chapter of Isaiah as we look at the subject this morning, the remnant, which doesn't sound like a great Father's Day title, so we subtitled it Father's Day. Hopefully we'll have the two connect at some point. Understanding that Isaiah is not the first passage I would have picked for Father's Day, but all you tend to be is a little bit of prayer away from some clarity at times when it doesn't seem like it connects in your mind. And so as I began to study and as I began to pray, I began to see some things in the life of Isaiah, who was a father, and the challenges that he had leading Israel during a time when it wasn't so easy to daddy. And so understanding the context in which Isaiah is living out his life can help us not only, as we try to do on Mother's Day, appreciate the day, but also embrace the reality that you still have a life to live after Sunday and after you are honored on Dad's Day. And that's the reality of Isaiah. As we pick it up, let's just start in verse 1, chapter 1. Verse 1, chapter 1 of Isaiah says, the vision of Isaiah, the son of Amoz. Don't even know if I'm pronouncing that right. Amos, let's try it twice. Which he saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem in the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah. And that is one verse that is super easy to read over, but it gives you a lot of history that helps you understand why we started off my very first sermon here this year entitled Foundation. Because we are in a section of Scripture that is going to have a lot more meaning for you if you understand the historical context in which this man and these people lived. Understanding that King Uzziah was not the kind of king you would expect a prophet to come yell at, because he was a pretty good king. Israel was doing super well, I say Judah, because Israel, by this time, if they hadn't already been taken off into captivity, it was around the corner. Judah was the one who was able, like I used to live in Minnesota, when the Packers weren't doing so well, Minnesota was like, yeah, And so this is that time for Judah. They're still doing well in a time when Israel, not so much. But we are going to see that Israel is not so much, I have to correct that. They haven't been taken off into captivity. Their captivity is on the doorstep, and that is part of what Isaiah is going to be talking about. And so for two reasons, we have to understand how the time period that Isaiah is in is going to make it really tough for him to do his job, because he's going to say some things that are very different than what the weather is looking like at the current time in Israel. So understand, when we look at the weather report and the weatherman gets it all right, we're like, thank you. But there are times when he's saying some things, it's kind of like he didn't get that right, and I'm not really trying to listen to him again, understanding that it just seems kind of random. Understand that the prophets weren't getting it wrong, but they had the job of saying some things that weren't necessarily falling on, they were kind of falling on deaf ears. And how do you know? Turn back with me, please, to 2 Chronicles to get some of that context, to understand who he was talking to and when he was talking to them. Verse 1 of chapter 26 will let us know that all the people of Judah took Uzziah, who was 16 years old, and made him king of Israel instead of his father Amaziah. And Amaziah had done pretty well, but he lost some battles late that tarnished his reputation later on in his reign. But Uzziah was going to actually turn all that around. However, verse 16 is going to help us know that after things started to turn up for the better, kind of, as brother said in the young adults class today, sometimes the success can go to our heads, and that was the battle Uzziah had to fight. Why? Verse 16 will say, but when he was strong, he grew proud to his destruction, for he was unfaithful to the Lord his God and entered the temple of the Lord to burn incense on the altar of incense. But Azariah the priest went in after him with 80 priests of the Lord who were men of valor, and they withstood King Uzziah and said to him, it is not for you, Uzziah, to burn incense to the Lord, but for the priests, the son of Aaron, who were consecrated to burn incense. Go out of the sanctuary, for you have done wrong, and it will bring you no honor from the Lord God. Then Uzziah was angry, Now he had a censer in his hand to burn incense, and when he became angry with the priests, leprosy broke out on his forehead in the presence of the priests in the house of the Lord by the altar of incense. And Azariah the chief priest and all the priests looked at him, and behold, he was leprous on his forehead, and they rushed him out quickly. And he himself hurried to go out, because the Lord had struck him. And King Uzziah was a leper to the day of his death, and being a leper lived in a separate house, for he was excluded from the house of the Lord. And Jotham his son was over the king's household, governing the people of the land. Understand the first thing that you might want to understand on Dad's Day, as we have already alluded to, dadding ain't always easy. And so understand the way in which the priests, when they have to live in this environment as well. It's easy when things are going well to simply join in the party, but there are some things that the priests and that you as people of God living in an environment that does not always agree with what you might call integrity. There's some things that you're going to have to stand for. We say it all the time out in the world, whether it's your workplace, your school, wherever you live. And understand for the priests, what that did was that brought on them the discipline of the king. It doesn't say he was going to do anything to them, but it says he burned. It says that his anger burned, and we can only imagine what he was about to do before God stepped in. And wouldn't it be easy if all the time as dad, when you had to say something unpopular, God stepped in and settled the discussion for you? But life doesn't work that way. And so there are times that, much like we're seeing in the Revelation, God will step in on your behalf because he sees the weight on you is that heavy. Not just dad, but mom. Appreciate God for the times in which he steps in on your behalf, because those days are rare. And it often has to build up to a point where he hears you over and over. You hear in the Psalms, cry out to God. It's not so much a whisper. It's not kind of like, God, would you... If you have time, could you? Over and over again since the wisdom literature, we've seen it in Job, we've seen it in the life of David, and we've seen it even in Solomon, who once again reigned over a wealthy time in Israel's history. God's men get to a point where they have to cry out to God because the weight gets that heavy. And so when you get to a point when the weight gets that heavy, mom or dad, and you're in a time when you don't see anybody else around in the other lane to encourage you, one of the things to realize is you are not alone, even if you are literally all alone in that moment. Because the priests are working in the same environment that Isaiah will have to work in, even though we never see them necessarily meeting. The prophets had to function more in isolation, and that's the context that Isaiah is functioning in. See, if the king is angry at the priests for just doing their job, understand what kind of tone that sets for everybody else in the nation. And understand what Isaiah is going to have to do when God isn't stepping in to strike lightning down on everybody who disagrees with what he's saying. He's just got to learn to deal with it. And so the second thing to understand on Dad's Day is the reason why Paul tells us to run with endurance is that we need to take these days when God steps in, because one of the recurring themes in the book of Isaiah, as we just use this as an introduction, is the day of the Lord. And that's one of the things that Brother Barry has been linking to these different books of the prophets. Because in the Revelation, we see the day of the Lord, meaning that final day of judgment. But Judgment Day isn't just a thing for the Revelation. The day of the Lord, in the way that the book of Isaiah is structured, is something he spends the first 12 books of Isaiah not yelling at the nations, even though this is a book that's written to the entire world. He's talking to his people, because in much the same way that Paul says, I think it's Paul or Peter says, if judgment begins with the children of God, what's going to become what's going to become of the unjust and the sinner? And so understand, Isaiah is laid out basically in the same structure that the apostles are writing. Judgment starts with God's people. And so what he is helping them to understand through 12 chapters there are two groups of people, like we talked about in the Song of Solomon. One of the things that I began to see is this book is organized in a lot of ways like the Song of Solomon. And that might be one of the reasons why one of our brothers pointed out it is a metaphor for God's relationship in some ways with us, not just Solomon's relationship with his beloved. Why? Because in the Song of Solomon, we saw roughly three characters spelled out for us. We had the beloved, which was really Solomon, his beloved, which was his wife, and then it was the others, understanding that she was not the only one he was married to. We don't necessarily know who the others were. But understand how, Isaiah is going to take roughly the same shape, but it's going to be more difficult to see because he's literally talking to entire nations. But in those entire nations, it's going to be the same three groups of people that you see in the Song of Solomon. This time it's just going to be God, primarily speaking through Isaiah, who is talking to an entire nation, and within that nation, a remnant. And that's going to kick in around about chapter 10, literally, but he's going to be alluding to that all the way up to chapter 10. And other than the remnant, it's once again the others. And it's easy to get confused because it's a book that's mixed with rebuke and encouragement, like our brother read. The Messianic prophecies are typically look forward to the day in which you don't have to struggle to do right. You don't have to have extra wisdom just to try to balance what God has called you to be and what you have to be in your daily life. It just exists effortlessly as sleeping on a good night's sleep. That's what living is like. It's like rest, and that's why it's literally defined. By the time you get to Hebrews, don't miss out on his rest when everything is as easy as just taking a nap. Like we had one of our brothers say, when you've had a hard work day and you don't have to try to sleep. That's what he's pointing forward to as soon as you get to chapter 2. Why does he give you some hope in chapter 2? It's called the light at the end of the tunnel. Because he says the process of getting there is going to take some cleansing. And that's where that concept of the revelation kicks in again, because they are going to, in Israel, at this time, or really what's left is Judah that he's talking to now, they're going to have to pass through the judgment. Heard about it? Yeah. It's what they spend so much time talking about in the Gospels and in the writings of the apostles. And so in a lot of ways, one of the reasons why this is an opportune time to look at the book of Isaiah is it gives us an opportunity to look at the whole concept of what does it look like to actually survive or pass through the judgment successfully. And so one of the reasons why the historical books are even more important is understand. It's one thing for me to say, oh, there's a remnant, and once again Isaiah's telling us to be good, same thing that God told us to do in the law. But between that, the Bible helps us get a picture of what it looks like to survive the judgment. Read about it in Ezra. Read about it in Nehemiah. Read about it in the book of Esther much? Well, if not, that's what I'm asking you to do, even if you don't have small group today. Take the guided lesson. And this week, that's the one from last week. If you have one, pick one up, even if you aren't going to small group today. Because what I'm asking folks to do this week is to go beyond this week and look at the lives of people who actually survived the judgment during the time of Isaiah and say, okay, I know what God is telling me to do, but one of the reasons why Christ had value is because he lived out what God was calling us to do perfectly, but he's not the only one. This book is an encyclopedia of success and failure. And if you are really using the word effectively in your life, the things that I'm saying you're going to have, look, I have an opportunity as soon as I go get something to eat to forget everything I'm telling you right now, right? And that's the reality of life. The question is, are you going to be able to have a better understanding of what it looks like to survive the judgment by taking your own time to study the characteristics of men like Ezra and Nehemiah and Esther and Mordecai and those priests, as some had different roles. They weren't all going to come back from the 70 years of captivity. Some simply had to, as dad, get ready for the next generation. Because you had to make sure that when they went back to Israel, they hadn't become so much like Babylon that they basically started the cycle all over again. And understand, that was a real struggle. Because when they came back during the days of Ezra and Nehemiah, that's exactly what they did. They started the cycle of failing all over again as soon as they got their second opportunity. And so that's why it's so important to understand in the lives of these people, we see not only what Isaiah is going to be calling them to be conscious of, but what it looked like in the lives of those who actually made it through the judgment. And those who made it through the judgment without starting the cycle all over again. And so I think in life, sometimes you've probably heard, like I say, I love the union between the sacred and just the common everyday folks who don't believe in God at all. The science of psychology. When you hear about cycles, that's the same thing you're seeing in the Bible during this period of time. When he's saying, Dad, understand how to realistically set expectations for your family after the celebration of Father's Day. And the question for us becomes, who are we going to pick? First question is, what do you value in a role model? What do you value in a role model? I'll tell you, as a youth minister, I don't have kids, but when I was a youth minister, one of the things I valued, is one of the things our young brothers were talking about today in the young adults class. It's nice when you have other people who are willing to help you out from amongst the group that you are working with. So you aren't the only one saying it. And so one of the reasons role models are so important is you don't necessarily have to be the only one who's trying to convince your kids of X, Y, and Z if You have surrounded them with people that you feel comfortable with them listening to and being around. Because there's just a certain point where no matter who's doing the talking, I get bored with my favorite teachers. The folks I click on YouTube, I'm like, this guy's amazing. I think I can listen to him forever. Think how long that lasts. Exactly. Thus role models. Because once the ball or the baton drops on hearing even the best teaching, you still got to find somebody to listen to. And that's why he talks about us being put together in a family. So that God willing, it's not just your voice they are listening to. You have a healthy network of people who are making the lifting not so heavy even during the days that they are listening to you. And in times when you just need a break, you still have somebody who can make sure that not everything is just going away or becoming a wreck just because you need a nap or just because you need some time away or just because you need some time where you don't have to be quite as diligent as trying to make sure that everything's going well and not falling apart. And that's where family kicks in, right? But Isaiah is one who is helping us understand that during the reign of a king like Uzziah, when things are going well, it's hard to get people to focus on life as a remnant. They can't imagine what it's like being a remnant. Why? Just everything's flowing. They're in their what we call zone. And when you're in the zone, one of the challenges of life is it doesn't mean that you just always taking naps. Sometimes you can be so blessed, you're struggling to just take care of all it is that God has blessed you with in terms of in your seasons of abundance. Because abundance comes with another kind of busy, which is one of the reasons why it's important to look ahead and not get wrapped up in the moment, whether it's for good or for bad. I'm literally convicting myself of all the things I'm thinking about that Monday should get done that probably just aren't. Because I'm living that struggle, right? And so ultimately, they say inch by inch, it's a cinch. Yard by yard, it's hard. And so that's why sometimes you just got to stack Mondays or whatever your day is. Whatever your day is to progress and think past the moment to what's going to happen down the road. Maybe don't get upset at yourself as much for not getting everything on the checklist done next time you got one. But also understand how important, those reminders can be very important. Don't worry about that. But also recall how important it can be to just knock the to-do list off a little bit at a time and to make sure how the things on your to-do list are not simply comprised of things that you need to get done to make sure that life is going okay today, but that you're looking down toward the future to make sure that you are effectively as you want to plan your family's future, their inheritance, their money. Understand what it looks like to be the kind of remnant that survives the judgment. And so that's what the study guide is about this week. It asks you two questions. One, you don't have to think a whole lot. It's Dad's Day. I put like 2 scriptures. That's it. Keep it moving. But just tell me what you think about those people who I've just mentioned. Don't think about it. Don't study it. Don't do a thing. When you hear the name Ezra, what comes to mind? When you hear the name Nehemiah, what comes to mind? When you hear Esther, what comes to mind? Don't think too hard. Just write it. Then commit to study over time, whether it's a day at a time, a week at a time. But I'm going to ask you to do something. As a preacher, I often feel bad asking folks to do stuff. I'm going to ask you, give God the first fruits of your day. Start your day off understanding what it's like to be the remnant who survives the judgment. I don't think that's too much to ask. It'd be too much to ask if I hadn't done that. But you might want to not do it when you hear the story. When somebody started planting seeds in my mind about being a preacher, leaving what I was doing to be a preacher, they threw me in a class. They said, teach that class. I was like, why? What did I do wrong? Right? But it wasn't what I did wrong, as much as it was an opportunity to grow. And so I had to go beyond or grow from studying as a student in someone else's class to my first stop was an assistant in someone else's class. And that's when I had to make the shift from just kind of listening to what other people were saying during the assembly times to actually giving the first fruits of my day to study and to committing that to being a lifetime habit. And ultimately, that's what I'm asking of you, dads, on this day in which you are honored. You don't have to study Ezra. You don't have to study Nehemiah. But please don't miss the opportunity we have in the prophets to understand what God is trying to tell us about what it's like to be able to successfully pass through the judgment. See, because it would be easy if it were simply Israel or Judah versus the world. But understand, we've already talked about that whole concept of only 20% of God's people are who he's talking to now. He starts out with 12 tribes. He's not talking to 12 tribes anymore. He's telling the southern 2 tribes, get ready because the northern 10 are about to invade you with Syria. And so now the people of God have teamed up with the people of the world to attack the remaining people of God. And the reality is you have to be ready as a father for that reality. When you decide to stand up, not all the Christians in your space are going to stand up to defend you. They're probably going to take a step back. Don't be shocked at that. Isaiah. Likewise, don't be shocked at the reality. We've heard it before. I'd rather see a sermon than hear a sermon any day. We're going to get to a chapter in Isaiah where he's literally going to say, I and the children that he has given me are an illustration or an example or a portent for what is about to go on in Israel. Because he's literally going to name his kids according to the timing by which they're going to get relief in Judah from their enemies, Israel and Syria. And it's going to be because he was obedient enough to name his kids what God said to name his kids, even if it seemed a little odd. And so understand, even if God isn't calling you to name your kids something that seems a little odd, he's going to call you to do some things that are going to seem a little odd. You got 2 choices to make. We say it all the time, but this is a chance to get a better understanding of the why. I can be a great fit with the now, which is another principle of the now and later. Or I can look a little weird now in getting ready for the later. And the reason why that mattered to me, I think I'm just going to, I don't know how long I've been talking this week, but I'm going to kind of cut it there because ultimately I got a chance to see a story that was 3 years old on my news feed this week. And I felt like I was a little behind because it happened 3 years ago. You want everything's kind of fresh. It's like anything that happened outside of 3 months ago, I can't get any value from, of course. But this story was about a young man who was about 6 years old who saved his sister. Some of you might have seen it. And 3 years ago, when you see the thumbnail, it doesn't always tell you the whole story, but you didn't have to look at that story very long before you saw that young man really saved his sister from a dog attack. And the way you knew it was true was because half of his face, I think, was on the left side. He had stitches running almost from the top of his skull down to his mouth to his chin. Can't remember how many stitches it was, but it was a lot. And the thing I noticed was they had all of these famous people. He was a hero. He was a fan of the heroes, the Avengers. They had all these famous faces I recognized. I was like, they're on a phone call with this kid. It's like, oh, and I clicked on it and I saw why. It's because they were trying to encourage him. But the reality is when you make those difficult choices as a man sometimes, it's going to leave you with some scars that even your greatest heroes aren't going to be able to help you heal. And so as that kid was on the phone with some of his favorite people, that kid could not smile. And that was one of the things that caught my attention. Because, yeah, he saved his sister's life, but it came at a huge cost. And no matter what he was seeing on the phone, no matter what kind of gifts they were promising to send him, he still had a long road ahead of him in terms of the healing. The point at which I became happy that I saw it 3 years later was I saw this kid smiling after I clicked on one of those stories. And it was after the healing had begun. And it was almost complete. And this time I didn't see any Avengers in the thumbnail. He didn't need anybody to try to help encourage him because God had helped him heal to a degree that his smile was once again organic. He didn't have to put on a good face just to make sure he wasn't dragging down the mood of the people around him. God had healed him to a point in which he could naturally enjoy life again. And so all those gifts that the Avengers were sending in, now a few years later, he was actually able to enjoy all the attention he got when he was simply trying to heal. Here's the thing. As a preacher, I want to be able to tell you that the path of the remnant is going to be, it's just, if the Avengers called you, you'd be, no, it's the path of scars. And so even though that young man wore his scars on the outside, talk about it from time to time, there are a lot of us who are wearing the scars on the inside. And I say that because when I got back from the mission field, I'm doing all these videos now. I thought I was planning ahead. I was like, I really had 3 weeks of material in the bank. So even if I got sick, I wouldn't have to worry because I was almost a month ahead. And I started going back through all those stories I recorded as soon as I got back from the mission field. And I realized I couldn't smile. As much as I tried, I couldn't really smile. And so even though I had a bunch of material banked, I had to start over. Because praise God, by this time I was able to genuinely smile again, right? And so that is the road that God is calling us all down, right? There's a road where he can't promise you you're always going to be able to smile during or under the weight of the load that he's calling you to, Dad. But understand the glory of the story is like we see in chapter 2. The messianic prophecies start early, so he gives you the light at the end of the tunnel at the very beginning. So as you make that very difficult choice, not to take the path of the others, not to step back in a time when you need to step forward, even though you already know this is not going to end well, right? He's not promising you no scars. He is promising you that you will be able to genuinely smile again. What's the alternative? I've told the story a number of times now. A prison of our own fiction. Different people I've seen over time. Mostly now since we were in the age of platforms and the internet, I got to retell this story because I got to see a story about a bunch of influencers who had differing levels of success. Some had never really made it, some had really made it, and the ones who really made it weren't always doing all that much better than the ones who hadn't. And I keep telling the story of this one young lady who made that issue of the prison of my own fiction so much more real. When she talked about, yeah, I'm making money, but at the same time, this isn't really me. And so when we talk about the whole concept of smiling, she smiles for a living to keep her audience or her followers entertained. But the smile that she has, it's not organic. It's just something she has to do to make money. And that's often the trade-off. See, I heard it stated this way. A coward dies 1,000 deaths. A soldier dies but one. And it sounds so cliche until you're caught in the cycle of having to smile when you don't really want to. And so what I have to do as a preacher is to call you into some tough choices. And it's bad and worse. But there's no pain-free option in Jesus. It is it's simply the choice of which scars do you want to suffer. Is it the scars of every day having to live up to an image that ain't really you, just to survive from day to day? Or is it trying to take on the pain right now of studying what it's like to be the remnant that actually survives the judgment? And so on Father's Day, as I often tell folks, I can take any subject and turn it morbid. Apologize. Please enjoy the day. For those I haven't seen before, please come back. I promise that I'm different, but then you'd ask around and they'll tell you next week will be yeah. But there is a reason, as we like you say, proud. I'll usually say that. What I saw in Titus this morning. Why? Because of a number of reasons. Because he's able to mix the humor with the young people on an occasion where they deserve to laugh a little bit. With the sobriety of what God is calling us to do as adults, which seems to be a great mix on Father's Day. We're talking about what it's like to actually live out the example for your kids after the day of celebration. Wishing you not only the strength that God gives you to be the kind of example you want to be for your family, but a tribe of people you trust with your kids to help set that example too, as we together stand and sing.